familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen. They've been on television. They have a lot of exposure from television, thank goodness to HBO and George Lucas. But I'm going to tell you that the Tuskegee Airmen have shoulders that they stand on, and I'm here to talk about those. So I'm going to talk about people that came before the Tuskegee Airmen, on into the Tuskegee Airmen and beyond. And before I do that, I have a family member of a Tuskegee Airman. Karen, would you stand and be recognized? Karen Daniels is the daughter of a Tuskegee Airman, and she lives here in Palm Springs. And she was kind enough to come. As a matter of fact, Ruiz, the congressman, presented her for her father a congressional gold, and we did it here in this museum. So I'm honored to have her here with us. We are a Tuskegee Airman family. We continue to keep our legacy alive for our parents. And we teach our children to do the same. Because American history is important, but it's only important if we share that history. And my history is not important any longer as far as I'm concerned, because I've shared it all over the world. But your history is important because I haven't heard it yet. And so just know that everybody's history is important in America. There's one thing about America, it has nothing to do with race, but it has a lot to do with citizenship. And when Senator Truman here, and that's why those pictures are up there, because Dale White and Chauncey Spencer made a historical flight out of Chicago, out of Harlem Airport on 87th Street and Harlem Avenue, which is now Oakland, Illinois, in May the 8th of 1939. Their goal was a 10-city tour to fly south to introduce this to the historically black colleges, better known as HBCUs. And one of those colleges was Howard University in Washington, D.C. They got supported by Dwight Green, who was the governor for Illinois, and Mayor LaGuardia at that time, who later became governor of New York, to work together to introduce and encourage people of color to get involved in aviation at the college level. And they called that the Simple Pilot Training Program, better known as the CPTP. When they did that, Everett Dirksen, who was a congressman out of Illinois who wrote the bill for then Franklin Roosevelt, had put the bill on his desk in December of 1938, but they left out all of the black colleges. So Chauncey Spencer and Dale White, through the organization, the National Airmen's Association of America, their goal was to be included into the military on every level, including aviation. So their flight there, when they landed there, their contact was Edgar Brown. Edgar Brown was a lobbyist for the National Airmen's Association of America. He knew all the senators and the movers and shakers in Washington. So when they landed there at the airport, they were flying an ill-equipped airplane called a Lincoln Page biplane, a World War II. You call it a crop duster now, because that's what they ended up using it for. And this plane only had two instruments. It had a drag tail, it had an altimeter, and an oil pressure gauge, and that was it. It didn't have a yoke, it had a stick. So you pull back on that stick, and you get lift, just like you pull back on that yoke. I am a pilot, I'm not licensed, but I can fly any propeller plane that you put me in. I've been around aviation for a long time. There were 992 Tuskegee Airmen, and I was able to know and meet 775 of them before they died. I got all of their stories. So I take those stories all across the United States. There are many that have not been published, but I make sure that their legacy is alive. My goal is to be the voice for those who no longer have a voice, who have created a voice for us. And so when Chauncey Spencer and Dale White get to Washington, Edgar Brown takes them into the Congressional Building. And there's a little trolley car that goes underground into the Congressional Building. And there was a senator standing there waiting to go out to the airport. And his name was Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman was a junior senator. It was his first year in the Senate. And he said, "Good morning, Edgar. Who are your two friends here?" And so Edgar said, "Well, they're trying to get into the Army Air Corps." And so Truman says, "Well, why don't they join? Aren't they citizens?" And so Chauncey Sr. said, "Yes, sir, we're citizens, but it seems to be for whites only." Truman then stopped him and said, "Don't talk about race. Talk about citizenship. And every citizen in this country is entitled to the same rights." And I teach our young people to know two things when it comes to civics and U.S. history. Learn the Constitution and learn the Bill of Rights. Those are the two contracts between the people and the government. And if we continue to do that, we will have a strong America. We've always had a strong America, but we will continue to be a strong America. But we have to pass those teachings on to the generations that will become our leaders in this great country we call America. So when they got there, Truman said, "Well, listen, Edgar, how about if I come out to the airport around 3 o'clock and take a look at their airplane?" And so Edward looked at Chauncey and Dale and said, what do you think? And they said, sounds okay to us. So I'm named after my father, so my father said I look like his father, and he called him Pop. So he said, Pop, we didn't think he was coming out there, so we got out there at 3:15, but sure enough, Trooper was out there with 4 of his administrative assistants. He was standing up on a milk crate looking down in this old pit, and he said, you mean to tell me you flew this thing I'm looking at from Chicago to Washington? And Chauncey Sr. said, yes, sir, we did. Can we take you for a flight? And Truman immediately said, no, you can't take me for a flight. But if you got guts enough to fly this thing I'm looking at from Chicago to Washington, I got guts to find out why you can't become part of the United States Army Airport. This is how the door was opened for what we know now as the Tuskegee Airmen. Without legislation, without lobbying, nothing changes in America. You can protest until you're blue in the face, but if you have no agenda, and you have no legislators, and you have no lobbyists, nothing will change in America. When Black Lives made their protest, they missed one part. They had no legislation. They had no agenda. That's why it didn't go any farther than it went. They watched part of the protest that people like myself at 68 years old went through in the 1960s, but we went through there with organizers like John Lewis, Get in Good Trouble, John Lewis, Bloody Sunday. We sacrificed for the young people that we have today. The problem that I see in education is not in the education itself, it's in the curriculums of the education. And it doesn't start in the schools, it starts in your home. Each and every one of us are educators. We have life experiences, and our life experiences give us the quality and the qualifications to teach others. And so you all sitting here in front of me all have a part of life's lessons that need to be passed on to others, even if they're not your children. As the African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a community to raise a world. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm ready. Now I'll do what I'm supposed to do. And that's what I'm doing. Thank you. And thank Kevin, because Kevin came from the television background, and I didn't know that until we started working. I got an ace here. One thing I'm good at doing, other than talking a lot, I'm good at putting things together. If I need an astronaut, I'll go to NASA. If I need a garbage disposal, I'll go to Home Depot. So that's what I know how to do. I'm ready. So the first one, I can look here. So the first one we're going to go to in order. Eugene Jacques Bullard. So his real name is Eugene James Bullard. He came from Columbus, Georgia. He was one of 9 sons. His father taught his sons all how to read by using the Bible. Because we have to remember back then, African Americans, blacks, Negroes, and all these other hyphenations we have, we were not allowed to read books or go to schools. So we had to teach our children by using the Bible. And in the Bible is geography and many other things. So he told his sons, he said, if you ever have a chance to leave America, go to Europe. In Europe, they don't judge you by the color of your skin, but by the character of your person. And so the Ku Klux Klan attacks their house, and he leaves and he gets adopted by gypsies in Alabama. He leaves Alabama and finds his way into Norfolk, Virginia, and gets on a steamliner and ends up in Ireland. In Ireland, he read the paper where they were looking for laborers in Paris at the circus. So he joined to get over to Paris, and we got over there, he defected, and he went to a gym and became a lightweight boxer. And he learned how to box, and he befriended many French. And in 1914, when World War I starts, he had many French men that were his friends. And they said, come on, Jacques, because they changed his name from James to Jacques, because now he was in France. They said, come on, Jacques. And so Jacques joined in with the French. And in 1917, Eugene Jacques Bullard became the first African-American fighter pilot who fought for democracy but had to fight in France to do so. He stayed there. He became a spy for the French underground. He opened up a nightclub. People like Dorothy Dandridge and Langston Hughes washed dishes while they were becoming famous as part of the Harlem Renaissance writers and entertainers, because at that time African Americans had opportunity, but it was in Europe. And that's why many of our great musicians had to go to Europe to do so. And so he opened up a nightclub, and the Germans before World War II, they were in his bar and they got to drinking. And there's an old saying, and I'm a retired police officer, alcohol can give you loose lips, and loose lips can slip out secrets. And so the loose lips got by the juice, and the juice started telling the truth, and so the French got the information. So the Germans figured it out. They said it has to be that guy at that bar. So they went back looking for Eugene Jacques Bullard. By that time, the underground had got him out of France and into New York. where he ended up living in Harlem, and he operated an elevator car for the Rockefeller Center. He's the first African American on the Today Show in 1959. Charles de Gaulle found out he was there. He's buried in Flushing, New York with the French. He has a poetic saying at the end of his life that he has two countries. France is his girlfriend, and America is his mother. And he wanted to be buried in his girlfriend's suit, which is the French uniform, in his mother's hometown, which is Flushing, New York. And that's where he's buried. So that's the story on him. And I can go on with him because he has a great background. The next person we're going to talk about is Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman came from Atlanta, Texas. Bessie Coleman went to Langston University for 13 months and ran out of money. Bessie Coleman had 13 people in her family, and she was number 9 of the girls. So she was 2 next to the youngest. And so her 2 brothers fought in World War I, and when they came back, they didn't come back to Texas because they didn't want to live under Jim Crow, so they went to Chicago. Bessie Coleman had 2 choices. She could be a washerwoman like her mother down in Texas, or she could go to Chicago where Jim Crow wasn't active, but it was still racial prejudice in the North as well as it was in the South. She went to Chicago, and while she was in Chicago, she got a job as a manicurist. And so one of the people that was her customer was Robert Abbott. Robert Abbott is the first African-American billionaire in Chicago, and he founded the Chicago Defender. The Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier at that time were the largest 2 black newspapers. So Robert Abbott says, "Is this what your aspirations are?" And she said, "No, I want to be a pilot." I had read about Harriet Quimby in 1911, who was a white woman who built her own airplane, and so I know women can fly. And so she was inspired by Harriet Quimby. And so Robert Abbott said, "Well, sure, I don't have any problem paying for you to go to France, but do you speak French?" And so Bessie said, "No." And so Robert Abbott says, "Well, listen, you learn how to speak French, and I'll pay for your thing." So the Cardone brothers in France, which is a famous flight school in France, trained Bessie. Bessie came back 9 months later, taught herself how to speak French, and went to France. June the 21st of 1921, Bessie Coleman comes back to America, becoming the first African-American woman to be licensed. Amelia Earhart got her license 3 years after that. If you look at Amelia Earhart's license and you look at Bessie Coleman's license, they're identical, except for one says France, one says the USA, because they didn't allow blacks to get pilot license until 1926 in America, and it was under the CAA, later under the FAA, under President Kennedy in 1960. And so these stories that I'm telling you about Bessie Coleman was a barnstormer. Bessie Coleman's last flight was, she was looking over an area in Jacksonville, Florida, and the pilot lost control of the airplane at 5,000 feet. The plane went into a spin. She wasn't wearing her parachute. She didn't have a seatbelt on, and she was thrown out of the cockpit to her death in April of 1926. The next person. Herbert Fauntleroy Jr., a flamboyant individual from Trinidad. He learned how to fly in Canada. His parents were both doctors. He came from a wealthy family there in Trinidad, and he ended up being a politician. He bailed out on the East River, and he lost the airplane and got a ticket and got put on the front page and became a borough president. He became a politician, stayed a borough president until 1977 when he died. Before this happened, he goes over to Ethiopia and wrecks the only airplane that Haile Selassie had. Haile Selassie wasn't happy with him. Haile Selassie was the son of Queen Sheba and King Solomon. So he came from royal blood. So he was not welcome in Ethiopia. He finally left and came back to New York and became a politician. William Powell started the Bessie Coleman Aerial Club. William Powell came from Chicago. He had built his own gas station, and he had 3 other repair shops. He was very wealthy, and he was an entrepreneur. He wanted to learn how to fly, so he went to a flight school in Chicago where they said, "Well, you're colored. We can only teach you at night, but if you fight for your country, show that you're a patriot, then we'll teach you if you fight." So he went there. It was mustard gas. He was discharged on an honorable discharge, came back to Chicago where they said, "We still got to teach you at night." He said, "No, I'm not going to do that." He found a German flight school on East Jefferson in Los Angeles, where he said, "I don't care what color you are. If you can pay me, I'll teach you." He came to Los Angeles in 1928. He got his pilot license. In 1929, he then decides he's going to create the Bessie Coleman Aerial Club to keep the legacy alive. He meets James Manning. James Manning, the first African-American to receive a pilot license in America, came from Ames, Ireland. James Manning is the first African-American not only to receive a pilot license, but to receive an instructor's rating. We need an instructor's rating to have a legitimate pilot training program or a flight school. And so he encouraged him to come to Los Angeles, where in 1929 they started the Bessie Coleman Aerial Club. Eleanor Roosevelt takes a flight with Chief Anderson. Chief Anderson's real name is Charles Alfred Anderson. And Eleanor Roosevelt was a very close friend of Mary McLeod Bethune. Mary McLeod Bethune told Eleanor Roosevelt, when you go down to Tuskegee to check out the research on polio for your husband, check out those colored flyers. They're flying all around, but they won't let him get into action. So Eleanor Roosevelt was not only surprised to see black men flying, but to see black women flying. Because Herbert Carter, who was the first African-American Tuskegee Airman to land on enemy soil, his wife Mildred got her pilot license before he did. And Eleanor Roosevelt, if you see that historical picture, you'll see Eleanor Roosevelt talking to a black woman, and that is Mildred. And that's Colonel Carter's wife. Cornelius Coffey. Cornelius Coffey trained 200 of the 450 fighter pilots. Cornelius Coffey was one of the only non-universities to get the contract to train African Americans in the Civil Pilot Training Program. His business was called the Coffey Aeronautical School of Aviation. The other historically black colleges, one of them was Tuskegee, and that's how Tuskegee gets their name, because they were trained down in Tuskegee, Alabama. Willa Brown marries Cornelius Coffey. There's a story there. So John Robinson, I think, is going to come up next. So John Robinson and Cornelius Coffey were both bachelors. Willa Brown was working on her master's degree at Northwestern, and she got a job in Walgreens. If you know about Walgreens, it started in Chicago. And so she was working as a clerk, and so she was a beautiful woman. So both guys tried to date her at the same time. So they tried to impress her, and they said, well, hey, come out to 87 Harlem Field. We're flying. She said, there's no black men flying. And he said, well, come on out. And she was bit by the aviation bug. She ends up marrying Coffey, and they start the Coffey School of Aeronautics. Chauncey Spencer happens to be my father. Chauncey Spencer comes from a historical family. Chauncey Spencer's father was the first African American to create a housing project called Spencer Place in Lynchburg, Virginia, for the poor. My grandmother, Ann Spencer, a poet of the Harlem Renaissance, where they formed the first chapter of the NAACP, when James Weldon Johnson and W.E.B. Du Bois came there in 1913. Ann Spencer said, you know, we didn't know what poor was because we're all poor, but we're never hungry. So Ann Spencer never knew what poor was because the neighborhood was so-called poor, but it was never hungry. Harry S. Truman, a blessing to us all. If it wasn't for Harry S. Truman, there would be no Tuskegee Airmen. I just talked to you about legislators and lobbyists. He's the legislator. He's the senator. Most senators have a law degree. Harry S. Truman is the reason that the Tuskegee Airmen were able to go forward. On April the 12th of 1945, after a sudden death of Franklin Roosevelt, Truman becomes president. Shortly after that, in 46, he created the FAME committee to look into integration, and he started with the military. By 1948, Executive Order 9981, non-discrimination in the military, was in effect. Roosevelt creates the beginning of it, but he doesn't put any teeth in it. And that's in 1941, and that's Executive Order under Fair Employment Act 8802. That was to say that anybody that has a federal contract can't practice discrimination, but he didn't enforce it. Truman enforces it. The Navy is the last to be integrated. They refused to integrate until 1949 because they said black and whites cannot be on cruises and Mediterranean exercises for 6 months without killing each other. But we know that's not true, because as one Tuskegee Airman told me, he said, Chauncey, when there's two men, one black and one white in a foxhole, they're being shot at, race don't have a whole lot to do with anything. Benjamin Oliver Davis, a great hero of us all. The definition of what we call discipline. He was silenced for 4 years. He graduated from West Point in 1936. His father is the first African-American general. He was a one-star. Roosevelt needed that to get the Negro to vote for Democrats, because the Democratic Party originally was founded by the Ku Klux Klan. In order to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan, you could have never been a member of the Republican Party. Interesting. If you read up on it, you'll see what I'm telling you is fact. And so, Roosevelt needed to change the image of the Democratic Party to a working class party, and he did so. And so that's where Benjamin Oliver Davis, there's a long story on Benjamin Oliver Davis, but I don't want to bore you, I want to keep this on the road. So we're going to just continue on. Benjamin Oliver Davis becomes the first African-American general in the Air Force. Because you got to remember, the Air Force was the only branch of the service that was never segregated. The Air Force wasn't created until 1948. Before then, it was the Army Air Corps. The Army Air Corps was segregated, but the Air Force is the only branch of the American military service that was never, ever segregated. Noble Parrish, the blessing over us all. Noah Parrish came out of Kentucky. And Noah Parrish was down in Greenview, Illinois, where he saw coffee and them flying around on 87th Street because he was stationed there. So he knew blacks would fly. And so when it came time for coffee to get the program, they made sure the coffee school had the equal equipment that any other flight school had. So when they have the thing saying, well, the Tuskegee Airmen got these outdated airplanes, that's not true. They got the same airplanes as any other training facility got. See, discrimination and racism can be exploited. And I'm not going to allow it to be exploited. The Tuskegee Airmen are just like any other people. They're just men, black, white, green, or yellow. And each one of them have their own capabilities, not because they're black or not because they're white, but because they have their own capabilities as human beings. Grover Nash. Grover Nash is the first African American to fly U.S. airmail. He was also a member of the National Airmen's Association of America. His middle name is Cleveland, Grover Cleveland Nash, and he flew U.S. mail. They gave him the worst routes, and he could beat them every time. He knew the shortcuts. He flew in the Midwest, and that's Grover Nash. Deion Bluford, I met Deion Bluford a number of times. He's a friend of mine. Deion Bluford, when he came back from space, he flew with my father, who's going to be the next slide, showing the youngest African American and the oldest African American in aviation. But Deion told me, he said, Chauncey, I know you're young, you're 25 years old, I'm 68 now, you're 25 years old, you got to stick with your father. You guys may not agree on certain things because of generation gaps, but your father's going to end up being right. You may not believe it now, but I have to tell it, he's right. Eleanor Roosevelt, our blessing. Eleanor Roosevelt seen no color. Eleanor Roosevelt seen the opportunity. And when we didn't have the opportunity, she stepped up to the plate. She happened to be the first lady. And in that I say she was the first lady. And not only titles, but in her actions. Eleanor Roosevelt was the stickler. Eleanor Roosevelt was the one that pushed up on Roosevelt after that flight. They were down in Tuskegee in the Secret Service. My father was there. He said, Pop, they were almost wetting on themselves. They got on the phone. They said, Mr. Roosevelt, your wife's going to take a flight with a colored flyer. And Roosevelt responded by saying, if my wife wants to take a flight with a colored flyer, she's going to take a flight with a colored flyer. And obviously we know she did so. And this is the one I told you about when they came back. And if you look at Deion Bluford after he came back from space, his hair was all gray. This is before they went in space. And this is Deion Bluford and Chauncey Spencer Sr. At my father's death in 2002, on 2003, they put him on the cover of the Washington Post, and it shows in there flying in the face of prejudice. My father liked flying because there was not prejudice in the air. That's why you were free. That's why pilots love to fly, because they're free, like a bird. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask a favor of the audience. So the museum here has helped me a lot. And I ask you to consider buying the book that they have in the gift shop here. It's my father's autobiography. I'm the co-author on the book. I'd be happy to autograph it for you. It helps here with the youth program that we do here in the museum. And so it would be not only a good book to read, it would be a good donation. So I'm asking you to consider that. If anybody has a smartphone and Googles the book Who is Chauncey Spencer on Amazon, that book goes for $350. And we're selling that book here for $40. And that's a used book, by the way. The book is very rare. The book is going for as much as $1,250 for that same book. I've republished the book, and I carry it around with me. I did a good thing this year. I think I do a good thing every year, but I was very blessed. So I happen to know Harry Truman's oldest grandson, Clifton Daniel. And so I just left Independence, Missouri, where now my father's book is the only Tuskegee Airmen book that's in the President's Library. It's in Harry Truman's library. And so if you get that book, you'll have a book like Harry Truman. So I'm asking you to please consider that book. And this is one of the only places that you'll be able to purchase the book. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen.